Good afternoon. Hello, please take a seat. We're about to get started. Welcome to the Queen Victoria Women's Centre for this important event, Winning for Women. My name is Emma Dawson. I am the outgoing Executive Director of Per Capita, finishing up at the end of next week, and the incoming Executive Director of the Chifley Research Centre, where I'll be commencing just after the election. So I'm delighted to make that announcement for the first time. So this is a bit of a transitional event for me. I'd like to start, of course, by acknowledging that we're gathered on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. As my daughter says when she does this at school, they were the people that had the first gatherings, told the first stories, shared the first songs, and we thank them for their custodianship of these lands on which we meet today. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm delighted to see so many of you here today for this important conversation about the first term achievements of the Albanese Government for women and girls, and to be joined by such a fantastic array of Labor women. A few remarks before I introduce our keynote speaker. This government has achieved unequivocally more for women and girls than any in Australia's history. It is the first government, the first federal government that is truly gender equal. Slight majority of women in caucus and an equal number of women in cabinet. And it is no coincidence that 30 years after Labor introduced gender quotas, we have seen this result, and that it has resulted in significant gains for women and girls. I have no truck with the people that say there is no difference between the major parties on a number of very important issues like climate change and workers' rights and care for the most vulnerable. There are significant differences, and I would say no more so than in the area of gender equality and support for women, going back through my entire lifetime. This government has seen such significant achievements, and I won't dwell on them too long now because you want to hear from Katy, but we have record levels of women's labour force participation. We have seen long overdue commitments to increase the wages and fund those wage increases for aged care workers and early childhood education and care workers who are predominantly women. We have seen significant industrial relations changes that led just last week to the Fair Work Commission's historical decision on the undervaluation of women's income in feminised industries. We have seen superannuation paid now to be paid on paid parental leave and an expansion of paid parental leave to 26 weeks by 2026. Domestic and family violence leave has been implemented, and we now have 3 days of guaranteed subsidised early childhood education and care with no activity tests, so whether or not parents are in work or study or not. The first Women's Economic Security Statement was delivered by Minister Gallagher a few years ago, and I was very honoured to be in Canberra for that event. Of course, the restoration of single parenting payment to single parents, most of whom are women, until their youngest child turns 14, correcting an egregious mistake of previous governments, and the abolition of the Punitive Parents Next program, which forced the parents of very young children to jump through ridiculous hoops just to get a subsistence payment while they were raising very young children. A $500 million investment in women's health and tackling medical misogyny. Paid placements for students in teaching, nursing, social work and midwifery, again, most of them women. Exceptional women have also been appointed to very important roles, not just our Governor-General, of course, but the Chair of the Reserve Bank is now a woman, the Chair of the ACCC is a woman, and the Chair of the Productivity Commission is a woman. So when people tell you that there's no difference between the major parties, you've got a piece of paper that will prove them absolutely wrong. I was notorious for having tweeted during the 2020 federal budget that the claim by the then Treasurer of having handed down a package for women was exposed by my quick calculation, which showed that it was 0.038% of the total budget. The difference between that government and this could not be more profound. And so I am delighted to introduce now one of the most senior women in the Albanese Labor government, Senator the Honourable Katy Gallagher, is not only Minister for Women, she is Minister for Government Services, Minister for Finance, and Minister for the Public Service. And that's a powerful role to be able to achieve a lot of these great outcomes. She's also Manager of Government Business in the Senate. and manages to maintain her equilibrium despite that role. And we're very grateful that she's made time to be with us today. Please make Katy very welcome.
Thanks so much, Emma. And I also begin by acknowledging that we're gathering today on the land of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. And I extend that respect to any First Nations people joining us today. And I particularly want to acknowledge today the strength and leadership of First Nations women in Australia, who are often leaders of their communities, holders of knowledge, and constant advocates for equality. To Emma and your team at Per Capita and the Chifley Research Centre for organising today's important event, and to all those on the panels, including my colleagues, Assistant Minister for Women, Kate Thwaites, Assistant Minister for Health, Jed Kearney, Senator Jess Walsh, and I think Senator Lisa Darmanin is joining as well. It's so lovely to be here with all of you today in the final half of an incredibly important election campaign. Actually, more than half. It's only 11 days to go now. I checked my countdown clock this morning. And I think in terms of this election campaign, the contrast between the two parties that would form government couldn't be clearer. From the first ever federal government to have a majority of women members, to an opposition that can't and won't budge beyond 30%. From a political parties whose affirmative action rules require 50% women candidates, to an opposition that continues to pre-select men over women, with women only holding 6 of the opposition's safe seats. From a Labor government that has done more in the past 3 years to progress women's equality than we've seen in decades, to an opposition who wasted a decade in government. And from a Prime Minister who put gender equality at the heart of his government and at the centre of his government's economic policy, to an opposition leader who continues to consider women's policy as an afterthought and women as victims simply requiring protection. And a government who will continue to shift the dial in our pursuit of gender equality if we win the election, or an opposition whose Deputy Prime Minister, if they were to win on the 3rd of May, who recently referred to a female Labor MP as a dog. This is the choice on the 3rd of May for Australia's women. Now, I've had the enormous privilege to be Minister for Women since May 2022. And from that first day right up until today and beyond, our agenda for women has been front and centre of the Albanese Government decisions. I acknowledge my colleague Tanya Plibersek for her role in shaping Labor's agenda for women from opposition, which gave me such a strong platform to start work on when we won the election. I thank Amanda Rishworth, Justine Elliott and Kate Thwaites in particular for working together with me in women's safety, which has been critical to our overall approach in women's policy. I'd also like to thank all the women that have helped guide and inform the achievements of our first term, always keeping us accountable, keeping the pressure up, helping us to prioritise a very long to-do list for women. I acknowledge and thank you all. You join the very best of women who have always rolled up their sleeves and to continue the unfinished work of the generations of feminists who came before us and who have always shown up and who never took no for an answer. Now, Labor women in government are acutely aware that it is our responsibility to make the most of our time in government, to advance gender equality and to advance the rights of women. Labor has always been the party to take this seriously. It was Labor under Ben Chifley that led the world in embedding rights for women in the birth of the UN, driven by the formidable Jessie Street, and laying the foundations for women's human rights today. It was Labor under Whitlam that introduced no-fault divorce, the single parents benefit, and scrapped the luxury tax on the contraceptive pill, policies that were pushed by the first ever woman's advisor to a head of government in the legendary Elizabeth Reed. It was Labor under Hawke, side by side with Susan Ryan, who introduced the Sex Discrimination Act and introduced gender-responsive budgeting to the world. It was Labor under Julia Gillard and Jenny Macklin that introduced Commonwealth paid parental leave and established the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And it was Labor under Tanya Plibersek's leadership that who initiated the first national plan to reduce violence against women and their children. If you look at a timeline of key steps towards gender equality in Australia, you will see that every time Labor is in power, we deliver the lasting reforms that progress the rights of women. But we also know that progress isn't linear and that progress made can always be wound back. Susan Ryan put it best when she warned us all not to be complacent and said The gains were so hard to make, and if you don't watch out, they're going to disappear. So when I look back over the past 3 years, we have achieved a lot of progress together, as Emma outlined. We've expanded PPL to 6 months, encouraging shared care arrangements, investments in early education and care, getting rid of the activity test, guaranteeing 3 days of subsidised care for all children, supporting our critical early childhood education workforce by paying those workers more, as we have done for the aged care workforce too. We put gender equality at the centre of our workplace relations settings and worked so hard to close the gender pay gap faster, and it's been working. Women are earning $217.40 a week now, more than they were in May 2022, and we have shaved over 2% off the gender pay gap. We've made record investments to end violence against women, and we've put in place the second national plan to end violence against women. We've boosted the Commonwealth rent assistance, and with tax cuts and cost of living relief, these have all been informed by gender analysis. We expanded parenting payment single to when the youngest child is 14 and ended that harmful Parents Next program. We brought back gender responsive budgeting, another Labor innovation that had been abandoned by the Conservatives during their time in government. Under Jed's leadership, we've opened 22 endometriosis clinics and put reproductive health and menopause care on the agenda. And for those that don't read the women's budget statements like all of us do, every single one of them discusses menopause in all of the budgets since we handed them down. Now, we've done this, and it's been driven by the first majority women federal government in Australia's history, the first gender equal cabinet. None of these policies were an afterthought. It was the result of deciding from day one that women's equality is a core economic imperative. It was not by accident that the Prime Minister gave me the portfolios of finance and women in May 2022. It was a clear decision by him to bring the women's portfolio right into the core of governing, to sit alongside the money and the institutions which have traditionally been the domain of very protective men. Across this term, I've met with hundreds, if not thousands, of women and listened to them. And as a government, we've sought to respond. You called me when we expanded parenting payment single to tell me how your life was changed. You called me when we scrapped Parents Next and told me that a weight had been lifted off your shoulders. When employer pay gaps were published for the first time, women around the country jumped online to check out what they had always known but couldn't confirm. And it was women's voices from right around the country that informed our first ever national strategy for gender equality, Working for Women, focusing on women's safety, valuing paid and unpaid care, advancing women's economic equality and security, supporting women's health, and elevating women's leadership, decision-making and participation. Because we know there isn't one single or simple solution to achieving gender equality in this country. Women's health is connected to our work, women's safety is connected to our financial security, and the unpaid care that we undertake is connected to our security in retirement. Across this term, we've worked hard to advance economic equality for women through our tax reforms, through our payment systems, through rights at work and better pay, and through housing. And throughout this term, we've been focused every day on ending violence against women and children, as violence against women is the single biggest barrier to achieving gender equality in this country. People often ask me if I had a magic wand for a day, what would I wish for? And for me, the answer is always, always ending violence against women. Women need to be and have the right to be free from violence. Under Amanda Rishworth's leadership, assisted by Justine Elliott, we've secured the agreement of states and territories to a second national plan to end violence against women and children in a generation. Every jurisdiction has agreed to bold but important goals that we want to end violence against women in that generation. And importantly, all agreed to services, supports and policy priorities that pull in the same direction. We've backed this plan in with funding. In just one term, we've invested around $4 billion, including to provide direct assistance to victim survivors, to crack down on violent perpetrators, to support children who have experienced violence, and to engage with men and boys to prevent violence. We've also invested $3.9 billion in legal assistance services and ended the funding cliff that these essential services faced under the former government. Peter Dutton likes to include this funding in his list of wasteful spending, but we see it quite differently, as properly resourcing essential services such as women's legal centres. And in housing, we're investing in social and affordable housing after the wasted Liberal decade. And importantly, we've included specific measures to support women and children escaping violence in this area. And whilst we are proud of what we've been able to do already, we know, and as Labor people, we know there is lots more to do. There are far too many women who live with violence in their lives, and for these women, change is not happening quickly enough. Levels of violence remain high, and in the case of sexual violence, appear to be increasing. It is all too frequent that we see a chilling new headline reporting on the death of another woman, so often at the hands of a current or former partner. And we are encountering new challenges, particularly as we grapple with how our young people, especially boys, are accessing online content. We know the only way we continue to make progress in ending violence against women and children is to listen, learn, and be prepared to adapt and act when needed. This means looking at what's working and reflecting on where the gaps remain. It means considering new options and ideas when the evidence emerges, or when things change or new challenges arise. The national plan, developed alongside experts and victim survivors, is a critically important tool in navigating this work. But we know we must also evolve and act to build on its promise. In our last term, we made women's safety a priority for National Cabinet to ensure that all jurisdictions are working on ways to address this crisis. We've invested in justice responses to respond to high-risk perpetrators, while also investing in trauma-informed support for children, particularly those that have been exposed to violence, because we know that different drivers of violence require different interventions. We've made structural changes to the family law system, and we commissioned a rapid review of the evidence around prevention of violence to help further inform our work and our approach. In responding to the rapid review, we are undertaking an audit of Commonwealth systems to understand how they are being weaponised by perpetrators and how we can make them more accessible and protective for victim survivors. Already the audit is providing insights that we are acting on, and today we're announcing a number of reforms that a second-term Albanese Labor government will deliver, which come directly from conversations we've been having with victim survivors, advocates and experts about where government systems are letting them down. We will take action to legislate practical changes in the superannuation, tax and social security systems so they can't be weaponised by perpetrators. We will look at how we can stop abusers receiving their victims' superannuation, because there is no world where we believe that perpetrators of violence should benefit from the death of someone they themselves have abused. We will prevent perpetrators from using the tax system and corporate systems to create debts as a form of coercive control, and ensure perpetrators are accountable for these debts if they do. I acknowledge the work and advocacy of Senator Deb O'Neill, whose work as the chair of the recently joint parliamentary inquiry on financial abuse has been critical in exposing some of these terrifying practices. I also acknowledge Zanita Mascarenas for her advocacy on this issue across this term of Parliament. This includes dodgy practice of appointing people to directorships using coercion and without informed consent. We will put an end to this loophole, which has existed for way too long. And we'll also examine ways to apply this approach in the social security system, so perpetrators are accountable where their abuse results in victim survivors carrying the burden of debt. We're going to do more to stop high-risk perpetrators, and by providing additional funding through the Innovative Perpetrator Responses Fund to deliver new and practical ways to deal with those who abuse women in this country. This will build on our existing work with states and territories, including reforms like enhanced electronic monitoring and intensive behaviour change programs. This announcement stems directly from the National Cabinet discussions to deliver new world-first policing approaches to stop deaths from domestic violence. And it also complements the work we've started, such as pilots using focused deterrence, as well as domestic violence threat assessment centres, as two new ways of identifying and dealing with perpetrators that pose the highest risk. But we recognise there is still much to do, and Labor remains fiercely determined to meet the commitment and promise of the National Plan to end violence against women and children in a generation. And while our first-term agenda for women was ambitious, our second-term agenda, if we are fortunate enough to be re-elected, will be just as ambitious. As well as those safety reforms I've just spoken about, We'll be delivering the biggest investment in Medicare ever, and we will deliver over $750 million for women's reproductive health and menopause care, thanks to the incredibly hard work of Jed Kearney and her Women's Health Council, who together lifted the lid on medical and health misogyny and didn't like what they saw. Did you, Jed? No. We have also committed to $1 billion for mental health, and a re-elected Albanese government will also invest $16.7 million to open another 8 perinatal mental health clinics around the country, operated by the Gidget Foundation, that will bring the total number of centres to 20, and will see these centres provide mental health care for close to 5,000 new parents every year. A re-elected Albanese government will also make free TAFE permanent, a program that is supporting women to train and retrain without the worry of TAFE fees. And we are keeping an eye on that to make sure that women got their fair share of the free TAFE program. We'll wipe 20% off student debts and provide a Commonwealth prac payment to support nursing, midwifery, teaching and social work students to undertake what is now their unpaid prac. These investments will give women more choices to invest in their own futures and are a deliberate investment in the sectors that are supported by women and which support women. We'll also continue our work to close the gender pay gap. We'll address the motherhood penalty by finally paying super on government paid parental leave from July this year. And I acknowledge my Assistant Minister, Kate Thwaites, for all of her years of work on that. We will implement workplace gender equality targets for large businesses, and we have welcomed the Fair Work Commission's initial historic decision finding gender undervaluation in a number of feminised awards. And I acknowledge the 20-year or more relentless campaigning of the trade union movement in delivering this outcome. It has been quite an extraordinary and unrelenting effort. A re-elected Albanese government will work cooperatively with the Commission as it sets out a pathway to address the gender underevaluation of these awards, because we always support rights at work, including flexibility that you need to do your job and to live your life. We'll legislate to protect penalty rates in awards, which is a critical protection for women who are more likely to be employed on awards system. And as a government, as the largest employer in the economy, we believe the APS should lead the way. It should set the standard that other employers follow. And so we know that when often asked through workplace surveys, women often rate flexibility at work above pay rises in their order or their list of importance. This election, we've seen perhaps more of a focus on workplace flexibility than normal. And perhaps it was when Senator Hume sent the unguided missile telling that all those working from home that a Dutton government would frog march them back into the office. Talk about cut through. You could almost hear the gasps from suburbs right around the country as families started reassessing their work and care arrangements. The threat to upend those arrangements went down like a lead balloon. And so Peter Dutton stepped in and said, no problem, if you can't handle being back in the office, then women can always job share. What a choice, reduce your hours and pay or lose flexibility. Seriously, I didn't think you could make this stuff up, but so unpopular was their back to the office policy that they then had to do an embarrassing backflip, only to come back days later and say, actually, it is good policy, but we just hadn't found the appropriate time for it, which is a backflip on a backflip. But the Albanese government, we do recognise the importance of flexibility at work and what a game changer it has been for many women, including increasing options for work. We've been working to strengthen flexible working conditions, and in a second term, we want to examine how we can use flexible working arrangements, including work from home, to attract and retain more workers into the public sector. In this global fight for labour, the APS must look at how we can use our big employment footprints and our flexible working arrangements to ensure that more women, including women with a disability and older women, see working for the public service as a great career choice. Now, housing for women will also be an important priority for a second term and Labor government. In addition to the investment in social and affordable housing we have underway, we've made further announcements, including the first home buyers access to 5% deposits and building up to 100,000 homes for sale only to first home buyers, including those who've not owned a property in Australia in the previous 10 years. So if you're locked out of the housing market after a breakup or a crisis, the government will help you find a way back in. We'll build into the program guidelines that we work with states and territories. There will be an expectation that women get fair access to these programs, because we know, again, when you look at the evidence, women are underrepresented in many of those first home buyer programs. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Today, as part of all of what I've just said to you, it's wrapped up in our policy agenda for women. It's called Building Australia's Future, Labor's Commitment to Women. This really outlines the progress we've made to date to drive a gender equal Australia and how we will build on this foundation in a second term. We have the plan, we have the commitment, and we have the team. You can see them sitting here with me today to deliver on this commitment. Now, right at the beginning of my speech today, I spoke of the contrast between the two major parties when it comes to women and gender equality. And I really I mean, I know you hear politicians all the time say this election is very important and there's a real choice. But for me, when I look at what's on offer, the contrast really couldn't be more stark. And with that contrast comes the risk, because we know that a Dutton government would have us go backwards and put at risk all of the work and all of the progress that we have achieved together. And we only need to look at the track record of Peter Dutton and the coalition. He was a minister in a government that for 10 long years sat on its hands when it came to advancing gender equality. And after 3 years in opposition, he has not put forward a single meaningful policy to improve the lives of Australian women. No election commitments, no women's policy, nothing. Although, to be fair, he did say that cuts to the fuel excise will benefit women who are driving the kids around. And when he was forced to show his hand on responding to specific policies for women that we have announced, he's said that he will undermine super on PPL because he'll give you the opportunity to cash it out. And he's opposed our cost of living help that was designed to make things easier for women. He's opposed our vision for universal childcare and the abolition of the activity test. He's said that he'll abolish free TAFE. He talks a big game about protecting women and children, but he's never explained how he would actually do this or demonstrated any understanding of the complex factors that drive violence against women. We know that flexible working arrangements are back on the chopping block, and the cuts that will be required to pay for his taxpayer-funded nuclear reactors will mean cuts to services that women rely on, along with the thousands of public sector women workers who will be sacked. He'll abolish the HAF, which is the Housing Australia Future Fund, but not to worry, because last week he told us that his plan to claim interest payments off your mortgages through the tax system will allow homeless women to get into the property market and buy a home. So while we want to increase women's superannuation balances, Peter Dutton wants women to weaken their super and weaken their retirement incomes. And as I said at the beginning, the man who would be Deputy Prime Minister in a Dutton government last week likened our own Lisa Chesters, the member for Bendigo, to a dog, just last week. Now, that was just one throwaway word, but one that said so much about the Liberal and National Party. They haven't learnt a thing about women or shown whether basic respect for women is a standard that they would follow. So improving the culture of our workplace has been an important feature of the 47th Parliament, and women's representation in Parliament is a critical ingredient to drive the cultural change and to deliver the policy agenda that I've just outlined. Just over 30 years ago, in 1994, only 12.5% of Labor representatives were women. In 2025, it's 53%. It's an extraordinary achievement. It really is an extraordinary achievement, but it was driven by women in our party who never took no for an answer, the structural change that we put in place to make sure that Labor's representatives better reflected the communities that we are all elected to serve. In contrast, the Liberal Nationals today sit at 29% of women in their ranks, with only 11 women in the House of Representatives. And considering women only represent about a third of LNP candidates this election, they certainly have not set up a pathway to improve this story. So friends, we've seen what can be achieved when we have a government that has a core commitment to women, with every member of government working together to drive gender equality. Labor's message to women today is that a re-elected Albanese government will never take a step back from pushing for progress for women in Australia. Unlike our opponents, we have gender equality at the centre of our decisions, not as an afterthought once all the decisions have been made. Pursuing gender equal outcomes is woven through every decision, as it should be. So we have so much more to do and so much to protect for your daughters and mine. That work is never finished, but our sleeves are rolled up, and together, under an Albanese Labor government, we can get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Katy said when she was coming in, it's a long speech.
I'm sorry,
Bound
it was.
to be, because you've achieved so much.
It was a bit too long, I'm sorry about that.
No, it went very
I was whipping through it.
So much to get through. And I'll pass you this in a moment. So you've made two, I think, very important announcements today about a focus for the next term, which are tackling financial abuse of women, which we know is such a huge part of coercive control, and those innovative perpetrator responses. Can you talk a little bit more about that before I let some people in the audience ask questions?
Thanks, Emma. Well, on both of those fronts, I think the work that was done in this parliament around financial abuse and watching how technology is being weaponised to perpetuate violence against women, I think we've really lifted the lid on that, and again had a look under and seen that there are systems that the government has control over, but also financial authorities that we need to respond to. And I've had meetings this term with children who have gone through the child support system, with women who have been left with hundreds of thousands of dollars debts that they didn't know they owed. And when you hear those stories and you understand that you've got a responsibility and you have a capability, you need to respond to that. So a lot of work was done with the committees. So Deb O'Neill and Zanita, as I said, who did an extraordinary job. And then we want to basically look at how we lead the way in government to shut a lot of that down. To be fair to financial institutions, they are doing a lot because they're seeing so much abuse of their systems. And, you know, they have whole teams that sit there scouring accounts to see what's going on, to try and stop the awful violent messages being sent in the payment slip as a way of perpetuating violence. And so they're responding as well, but we want to make sure that the legislative framework is as tight as it can be. And on the ending violence, I think more of a continued focus on perpetrator interventions. So we need to continue to provide crisis services and support and pathways out of violent relationships, but we also increasingly need to hold the perpetrators accountable. And that's what the work that's going on through National Cabinet is going to do.
And it goes so much to, as far as possible, preventing the violence in the first place and recognising that no young boy is born wanting to hurt women, that it's learned behaviour. So again, thank you for that incredible work. Before I open it up, I do want to, as a personal reflection, you were for a time a single mother.
Mm-hmm.
I am now a single mother myself.
It's hard work.
It is hard work. And just to get you to reflect on not just the restoration of that single parenting payment, but all of those workplace changes, the support for flexible work, the lifting of the salaries in feminised industries, and the impact that has for women and particularly for single parents and how hard it is.
Thanks, Emma. Well, again, yeah, this is an area that the Status of Women Committee in our caucus has put a lot of work into, and everyone brings their own experience to politics. So we have a lot of us that have small children now, a lot of us that have brought up children through our working lives and know how difficult it's been, but also women that are just deeply connected into their communities who reflect the experience of many of the people they represent. And so it's like a big melting pot. We all bring it in and then try and see how do we respond. And one of the big issues, and I feel this again in a contrast between our kind of policy thinking, looking at how we deal with safety for women and ending violence, we see it as a whole of government effort. Like if women can earn more, if they can get better jobs, if they can leave relationships and be financially secure, if they can, if they can build up assets of their own. Again, this is part of the way we're dealing with the women's safety issue. But more importantly than that, that women deserve good jobs with good pay and the ability, as we continue to see, how much unpaid care we all do, the ability to balance all of those up. And we see valuing care and unpaid care, paid and unpaid care, as a critical part of government's economic agenda. And so paying early childhood workers, paying aged care workers, the award work that's been underway, to really make sure we are lifting women's wages, because that gives a whole lot of independence in a whole range of other areas of life. But it's all connected as well to all of Jed. I mean, honestly, this woman in a term, what she's done in women's health to put menopause, contraception, pelvic pain, all of those issues are now kind of part of our standard conversation. And how did that happen? Used to say menopause and everyone would run out the door. Now we own it.
Absolutely. Do stick your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. We've got some roving mics. While we're doing that, I'll just reflect on the fact that about 5 years ago, Per Capita published a report looking at women's equality in Australia, and it was pretty dire what we found back then. We'd collapsed in the global rankings. Yep. We found huge incidents of, as you say, a neglect of women's health, of those career pathways, the undervaluing of unpaid care being really at the root of a lot of our economy. And a lot of those things have been addressed in the first term of this government. And so as a researcher in the field, as somebody that has spent a lot of time looking at what needs to be done to have it so much achieved so quickly, I think we all need to be incredibly grateful for that and not let it slide backwards.
Yeah.
So first question from the audience here, and is that Julie Riley? Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah, and then Julie.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Zainab Sheikh. My background is a social worker and I work and manage a community called Maribyrnong Association. My question is, I was listening to what you were saying, there's a lot of achievement already in that space, but in terms of financial abuse, what steps has the government, Labour government, taken to address financial abuse experienced by refugee and migrants, women from African backgrounds, particularly those who face cultural and language barriers to access support? And I would add another one. How is the Labour supporting grassroots and community-linked organizations that work directly with African communities to prevent and respond to financial abuse and economic control? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and I didn't include it in the speech, but part of a big piece of the work we've been doing in the first term is making sure we fund the community sector properly. So one of our biggest investments actually in all of our budgets has been a multi-billion-dollar investment to make sure we index community grants properly so that people can pay wages and those community organisations can continue to do all the work they do. So we recognise that grassroots organisations is where it happens, and you do a lot on the smell of an oily rag, right? And the Commonwealth had not been lifting its game in responding to, just cost of delivering service increases. So that was a big part of what we've done. We're also working with the ASU and others to look at how we can make longer term contracts more standard. So I think, again, a big criticism of grassroots funding is that you operate year by year or 2 years, and then you don't hear until 3 weeks before the grant expires, so you might lose staff. And so what we're trying to do there is look at how we make more like 5-year contracts more standard, and in some cases where there's only one provider, that you look at longer ways of doing that. And that means you can build your workforce, and have that stability of income. So there are a couple of things. I think on the financial abuse, look, this is an area that the Commonwealth's going to have to do more in. And before we start pointing the finger at everyone else, as I said, the banks and other financial institutions are doing a lot of work. I went and had a look at a data centre where they're running essentially their financial fraud and other areas, and literally people sitting in front of screens watching and trying to read how transactions might equal violence. And it's amazing what they can actually garner from, information that they're picking up that way and then linking that back in. But for us in government, looking at how our systems perpetuate violence. And we've done an audit and it isn't great. And so there are areas in tax, there are areas in social services, there are areas in child support where we have to lift our game and make sure that we're not perpetuating that and perpetuating poverty for many of the women who are relying on those supports and payments as a way of coercive control and coercive violence towards women. So that's a big chunk of what we want to do next. We've started the audit, but now we have to really work on what are the legislative changes we need to make sure that women aren't carrying debts and aren't being deprived of income that they deserve.
And now, Julie.
Thanks, Emma. Thank you, Esther, and the other Labor women for all you've done for women this last term. My question is going to be about housing. My name's Julie Riley. I work leading Australians investing in women, and the lever that we're pulling in gender equality is philanthropy. So how do we get a gender lens on philanthropic funding? We've been working with Emma and the team at Per Capita for a couple of years to really bring together government, philanthropy, community housing and impact investment to really act on the research and reports that we have done that really looks at housing through a gender lens. So my question is, how can we work with you and the government more broadly on the billions of dollars that are going to be invested in housing in the future to ensure that women's needs and the solutions for women are at the forefront?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for everything you do, Julie, too. I touched on it briefly in that very long speech. I'm sorry about I did try and cut it back before
Stop apologising.
Well, it is. I'm not really a long speech giver. That's the problem. So I touched on it in the sense that I've spoken to Claire O'Neill about this, that in any money that we give to states and territories, and we've done this in vocational education and training, and we've done it in infrastructure as well, where we want an understanding of how the provision of that funding is going to deliver for women as a requirement of that grant. And we will look at how tight we can make that, because a lot of those programs are administered somehow or other through the states. But this is, again, I guess the Commonwealth using the levers it has available. Our lever is money, and we want to make sure that women aren't, that we are not considered, or that at the end of the day, all the money's out the door and women have got 30% of it. Like, that is not the outcome that we are going to be happy with. I think there is more to do with working, as you say, with a number of different stakeholders, particularly finding some room for trials of innovative housing solutions, because again, when you do a lot of women's forums and there's a lot of kind of women's co-ops and things like that of looking at, not having a one-size-fits-all of, well, single women, you live by yourself in a flat and we offer women with children a house out in the suburbs, but really having a look at what's possible. The Treasurer is very interested in impact investing and looking at how local community solutions can be used to drive innovative outcomes, and that would include housing as well. So I think there are some big pieces of work that are underway that we can join up more in the housing space, and I know Claire O'Neill's very open to it.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. Do we have? Yes.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for a great speech. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
No.
My name's Brie Gilbert, and I'm the CEO and founder of Race Papers, and we work with organisations to accelerate gender equality. Thank you for adopting all of the recommendations from the respective work inquiry, and I think that's where my question is, and where we go to next on that front. We know that sexual harassment is one of the biggest barriers to women's career progression, alongside obviously sex discrimination and motherhood penalty. I think we've seen the positive duty announced that's implemented this legislation. but there's probably still some more work to do on holding organisations accountable for that positive duty and how they are taking most proportionate steps to prevent sexual harassment and sex discrimination. What ambition or intentions might there be to invest in the body that can hold organisations more accountable or conduct investigations, being giving us permission under the next terms?
Yeah, so another big piece of work that was implemented, so thank you for reminding me of that. That's been an important part. I mean, I touched on the sort of cultural workplace change that we've seen in the Parliament, but making sure we adopted all of those recommendations was something we committed to before the last election, and we've done it. I agree. I mean, I think there'll be a lot of focus on some of the first cases that come through that, and part of my job as Finance Minister is to really work out how we resource the Attorney General's portfolio in all of those areas to make sure they are able to do the job. This term we kind of focused on the Community Legal Centre funding cliff. Essentially all the community legal centres in Australia were going to shut on the 1st of July. There was zero money in the budget for them, and so dealing with that in the long term was priority. But Mark, don't worry, he comes back with a long list of stuff, and I know that that's an area for him. I would also say the other big thing, and it was part of the unfinished business that in the Senate, Jess and I weren't able to get through in those mad, crazy days of March. And I'm just trying to recall that we didn't get through, but the WGEA legislation, which was really we did get it through, didn't we? I'm just living through the hell of those final sitting days. It was on, it was off, it was on, it was off. But that legislation, which Kate introduced into the House, and we actually did scrape it through, I've got terrible post-traumatic stress disorder from that final week, was the responsibility for large employers to actually not only report to WGEA, but to then say what they're actually going to do about the problems that they identify. And I think in a lot of the analysis, that is in the area of sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, so that will be very interesting. And we had to get it passed by the 31st of March or 30th, because the reporting, otherwise we would have lost a whole nother year to reporting, and now that is in place. So I think that as well will be a very interesting information to come through that, not only reporting, but actually making those boards and companies responsible for actually changing what's happening in their workplace, and not just pretending they don't know it happens because it is being reported. And I think that's going to be, really important. And unfortunately, for some crazy reason, the opposition didn't support that change.
We can only speculate as to what that crazy reason might be. Katie, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the Minister. It's a busy time.
Thank you.
We are, we say 10 days to the election, so thank you for making the time during this campaign. As you know, the Minister has an incredibly important agenda, a lot of important responsibilities, but I think what we've heard today is the achievements are profound and remarkable, and we mustn't lose this momentum. So thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. And I'll see you.
I'm going to welcome shortly our fantastic panel that we're going to have a chat with, but I was remiss at the beginning. I did not do any housekeeping. So just let you know that if you do need to use the toilets, you need to go out that side door there and around the corner. There is a fully accessible toilet on level 1, which you'll need to take the lift to. And I think that's all the prosaic stuff I need to do. So I'm not going to stand up again for this next panel session. I'd like to welcome to the stage 3 very formidable senior women in the Albanese Government. We're really lucky here today to have so many of them with us. Kate Thwaites is the Assistant Minister for Women. Jen Kearney, of course, is the Assistant Minister for Health and Aged Care. and Senator Jess Walsh, who is the chair of the very powerful and I would imagine very challenging Senate Economics Committee. Please make them very welcome. So we really are lucky to have these people with us here today to talk to you all about just what's been achieved and how. So I'm going to kick off with you, Kate, as Assistant Minister for Women. We've heard such a long list of achievements and ambition as well. What are you most proud of? It's like asking who's your favourite child, but what are you most proud of in this first term, and how have these wins been achieved?
It is really hard to keep going because it is comprehensive, with still more to do. I think I do feel very proud that the parental leave reforms. This is something that I think is a particularly Labor space. There was a Labor government under Julia Gillard and Tim Macklin who first introduced parental leave in this country. And we were behind other countries in getting to that point. I actually worked with Tim Macklin at that stage, so I got to see directly the impact that had, particularly for low-income women, women working in casual workforces who had never had access to paid leave before. So of course, Labor introduced this policy, and then for 10 years, nothing much happened with it because we had little national governments who paid lip service to this but did not do any further work on it. It was the Labor government coming in to say, look, this is a good start in terms of the policy, but there's so much more we could and should be doing it. So the work that we've done to both expand the amount of time that is available, to put superannuation on it, so that it is like any other workplace payment. So what that says to employers, what that says to businesses, is taking time out to care for someone is just like any other time out you take in the workplace. And I think that's a really important symbol, as well as the economic security obviously gives women, but it's a really important symbol about how we see caregiving, because all the data shows us that for women in terms of what earnings look like over their life, they start out at the moment pretty much on track with men, and then they have children, and it starts to diverge. And in fact, the data also says that men, once they've had children, their salary goes up, which is, it's something that happens to them apparently. But for women, that's the point at which their salary starts to flatline, and obviously they start taking time out. So that superannuation piece around both the pay and the stimulus ends. And the other piece we did with that was we introduced a use it or lose it provision. So that if men are not taking a certain proportion of that parental leave or second partners, they do not get to have it. And again, I think that goes to norm setting around who do we expect to be caring, who's to be the person who gets the phone call from childcare or from school. It can be men as well, and if we set those places in place from the start, I think that really changes the trajectory of not just women's lives, but men's lives. Men do want to be involved in this. They want to be able to say to their office and their workplace, I've got a role to play with my children as well. So I am particularly proud of that piece.
As well you should be. And I'd like to pause here to just acknowledge Per Capita work on super for women many years ago with the late Linda Walsh, Senator Linda White, who was a champion of this. Ellen Elkin and Eva Sheeran here today as well from the super sector, and so many women in the London that support that. It shouldn't be remarkable that we have that in 2025, but it will make a profound difference to the lifetime earnings gap for women. So very good choice. Jess, as I said, it's not a coincidence that we have a majority female government for the first time. What role do you think that is? And a shout out here to Emily's list. I know Pamela Anderson's here today, but also the amazing Tanya Kovac, who ran Emily's list for many, many years and was really involved in making sure that the progress was expanded. And I love you, mate, and thank you for your work. But how important has that been to just all of these achievements that we've heard? Is having, as Katy said, it's not an afterthought. We're not a minority. How important has that been in these achievements?
Thank you. Well, the minister who we've just heard from often says we are the first majority female Labor government. We're 53% women, but we are 100% committed to gender equality. So we let the blokes have a bit of a go, on this issue. It's well. And I would like to just give a shout out to the collegiality of Labor women, because Jen just whispered to you before. What are you going to say is your most important issue? So I'll say it first, which is lovely. Thank you, Jen. So I think the difference of being a majority female government and a government with the first gender equal cabinet, which has been placed remarked on as well. I think the difference that it makes is that it is not a question for us whether gender equality matters. It is not a question for us whether we are going to find and pull all the levers that we can to generate gender equality. It really is just a question about how we're going to do it. So we don't have to have that debate in our team, a debate that I think clearly the coalition is still having, with just 11 members of 151 member chamber who are coalition women. And to give just a couple of examples of how, I guess, entrenched the gender equality agenda is for us, not just for women, it's not just women's business, it's men's business too. I was so proud in the second debate when the Prime Minister was asked what he would like his legacy to be, what he would like his second-term legacy to be, and he replied, universal early childhood education and care. And of course, the Treasurer himself has consistently defended the investments that we've made in the care economy, in aged care, in early childhood education. On occasion, you get a sense from the coalition that when these jobs are growing in the economy and when there are pay rises in these jobs, that somehow that's not an achievement because these are not real jobs. And Treasurer Jim Chalmers is always very clear that caring work is important work, it's highly skilled work, and it's an important driver of our economy. So I think for us, being 53% women has driven a lot of change, but we are 100% committed to gender equality as Katy says.
Thanks, Jess. Yes, he's a good feminist, Treasurer. Jen, when I was doing research for Measure years ago, I knew what to expect in a lot of the workplace findings, a lot of the unpaid care, but what was shocking to me were the health outcomes. It was the misogyny in our medical system. And you've tackled this in a way, as Jess just said, women are collegiate. You've brought together a Women's Health Council and you've identified these problems that a lot of people were surprised to hear about, that you've started to talk about menopause and reproductive rights. And you've done that in a collaborative and engaging way. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and how it led to these outcomes? With, $750 million of investment in women's and reproductive health is a significant achievement. How did you get there?
With a lot of help and a lot of support from not only my party colleagues, but just from Women of Australia. And one of the first things we did after we put together the Women's Health Advisory Council was we did a survey, a national survey. It was a little bit leading as research, you probably wouldn't like the title, it was called Gender Advice Survey. So it kind of gave a bit of a hint to women about what we were after. However, it did give me an incredibly rich database of how women felt about the health system and their experiences. We had nearly 4,000 women respond just in a couple of months. We put it out in all different languages, and if you couldn't write, you didn't feel confident writing in English, you could do an upload story verbally. Like we really, really wanted to hear right across the whole community, all different communities, about how women felt about the health system. And of course, you're right, it was absolutely shocking. Once we established that there was a problem, some people still don't believe it, that there's a problem. But I raised it in with my colleagues, firstly with the Minister for Health, Mark Butler. There are 5 ministers in the health portfolio system. It's 6 now, but you picked the 5th, including Kate, which is great. And there was immediate, we've got to do something about this, and where do we start? So that's where the Women's Health Advisory Council was fantastic. We identified areas that we could start. One of the places where women felt most disadvantaged was sexual and reproductive health care. No surprise. And I remember saying to Mr. Butler, Mark, I think we need 3 larks. And he's like, what are larks? And I thought, right, we've got some work to do here. But immediately everybody else in that room said, absolutely, we need to talk about why it costs women so much more. Women predominantly bear the cost of contraception, they bear the cost of unplanned pregnancies, they bear the cost of abortion if they can get one, et cetera, et cetera. So we set about a plan, and we got a bit of a down payment on that in the first budget. We got $160 million, which was great help, and it did things like establish a gender audit of the MBS and the diagnostic services, which kind of snuck through the budget. Nobody really had a look at it. What is this about? But my goodness me, was it powerful. And it gave me a brilliant base on which we could start to make some really significant changes. For example, in the area of LARCs, long-acting universal contraceptives, to get an IUD, the average cost would be $400 to $500. A doctor got about, on a Medicare rebate, a third of a rebate of what a GP would get for doing a vasectomy. Now, the vasectomy takes nowadays about 15 minutes. They're in there, snip, done, you're out the door. Having an IUD inserted takes on average 45 minutes. You need a nurse in there, you need all sorts of different things. It's a much longer procedure, and they've got a third of the rebate. Unbelievable, right? And there's a whole pile of things like that that came out of that audit, which is still ongoing. We're still doing this gender audit of the MBS and the diagnostic services. So that was a no-brainer to fix that sort of thing. So how long since a contraceptive pill had been on PBS? 30 years. How long since the new menopause treatment had been on PBS? 20 years. So all of these things were brought up by the audit, and it was kind of low-hanging fruit for us to do that, but it was expensive. So we had to go to Jim Chalmers, we had to go to Katy, Gallagher, we had to go to the Prime Minister in this case, which Minister Butler did, and Katy's great champion. And when it's so bare-faced, when you see the facts in front of you like that, it was, that was a bit shocking. Yeah. And so we ended up with, $250 million in trying to fix that problem. So it was a bit of a journey, but I must say, never once was there any shirt from it. The Prime Minister was a little bit shy about talking about IUDs, but now he's very comfortable, very comfortable about it. And but we still have a lot of work to do. So part of what the Women's Councillors wanted to do is really address that gender bias where women are told there's nothing wrong with them, that all their symptoms are in their head, that they're being hysterical, and so we're seeing misdiagnosis of cancer, endometriosis, all sorts of other conditions. This is going to be a really big thing that we need to tackle. I have called together all the heads of the schools of medicine from right around the country, which was a little bit challenging. I had all these very powerful doctors sitting in a room just like this, and I had to tell them they're doing a shit job. As a nurse, that's very challenging. Very challenging. It was okay. It was okay. They said, yes, we know. So, we are making inroads, although one doctor infamously said, we can't have separate clinical guidelines for every single minority. That's exactly the reaction I wanted. Oh my God. Last time we looked, we were 51%. We're not a minority, actually the norm. So we've still got a bit of work to do, and there's so much about this that I could talk about, but it is one of the things that I'm really proud about, because everyone is talking about medical misogyny now. Every woman has a story, and it's really being picked up in the media and everywhere. It's really great. The medical profession is talking about it. Other health professionals are talking about it, and I really feel it's momentum now. And I'm hoping, one of my biggest hopes is that we really see some massive change right across the board.
I think we're seeing that change, and it's largely thanks to you. You want change in the health system, you put a nurse in charge of us. Thank you. Really is a remarkable shift just in the last few years, and seeing that attention on women's health issues, on things that, as you say, people were too embarrassed to talk about. Well, we're 51% of the population, and we all go through, most of us go through very similar experiences, so really important achievements. Katy announced today a couple of new initiatives that a re-elected Albanese Government will implement around financial abuse and those innovative perpetrator responses. It has been a remarkable set of achievements in the first term, but as the late Susan Ryan, who was a mentor to me, always said, relentless optimism, we must keep pushing forward or we will fall back. What do you think we'll see from the second term Albanese Government, both in the areas that the Minister outlined today, and what do you think is going to need to be, as Assistant Minister, the priorities in the next term?
Great question, because it's not job done. As everyone in this room knows, because I know these are things that people in this room have been pushing for a really long time, and so we do this work with all of you as well. I do think there is so much more to be done on family and domestic violence, and again, everyone in this room knows this. If there was one lever we could pull and it was done, we would have pulled it. This is complicated, it is hard, we are putting the money in, we are working with the states and territories, but we're not there, that's a reality. We do face, I think, a different environment in what we see happening with young men, particularly with what is coming through online. We've got to make sure that we are supporting young men to grow in a way that is safe for them and for the whole community. And I think as part of that work as well, I really want to acknowledge that we're doing a lot of work with First Nations communities as well. One of the things that we'll get to with if we have a second term is our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Family Action Plan. And that is really sitting under that national plan, but a plan that's being driven by First Nations people as to what safety looks like in their communities and how we get there. So I think that'll be a really important piece. And then what Katy finished up talking about, we did get through the Senate. I hadn't written it there. I wasn't in the Senate. I'm sure we got that there. I certainly talked about it in class. So I think that will be an important next part of those workplace reforms that will help us to go further in terms of both making workplaces more equal, but also continuing to drive down the gender pay gap. The data that we've seen so far on the gender pay gap has shown us that the investments we've made in heavily feminised industries, lifting the wages of childcare workers and aged care workers, has had a direct impact on the gender pay gap. I know it's kind of something over that actually, that's a huge thing. We need to keep obviously investing in that, and the Minister talked about how we're going to do that. But more broadly, how we are saying to workplaces, okay, you've got these responsibilities that you do report on publicly. What we've done with this new legislation is for large employers with more than 500 employees, they will now also have to report about how they're going to achieve the gender equity targets. So they'll have to choose 3 areas, they'll have to report to a GSA. These are the 3 areas we've chosen. Might be things like the gender pay gap, might be flexibility, might be the gender makeup of their board. There's a whole host of things they can select from. They will then have to say, here's how we're going to improve this, and then report back on their progress. And that then is all tied to how the chair looks at their compliance with legislation, and ultimately then how government looks at the someone department to do business with. So I think that would be quite important lever as well.
Such complex work, but one of the things that's emerging really strongly from this conversation that I love, because I'm a policy wonk, is that actually policy can change culture. Right? But that we too often hear, oh, that's cultural change, and it just takes time, and generations will come around to it. And we know that's not the case. We're seeing Gen Z men now with some of the most gender unequal attitudes compared to their previous generations. So policy matters, folks. It's not just some mawkish thing. I haven't asked you both, so I'm going to now give you the question, Jen. What is the thing you're most proud of from the first term? You're all going to get this question, aren't you?
Well, you say it's like choosing your between your children, which is the best child. And I had twins first, so I'm going to this isn't, as someone who fought for paid family and domestic violence leave, and I know you've been involved with some mighty gorgeous comrades from the youth movement who are here, and so many women have fought for that. The day that Tony Berg stood in the chamber and announced that paid family and domestic violence leave really shined in there. And yes, I cried. So that was just something that I fought for nearly 20 years, and I'm so proud of that. But also, I'm incredibly proud of the national conversation that we just started, that we just talked about around medical misogyny. I think that is really going to make a huge difference for women, and the changes that we've made already, women are really excited about it, and it's a no-brainer to anyone. And, you talk to the men, and the men are equally happy about it too. There was a bit of a concern that there might be, what about me, what about men's health? But no, it's not about, they're like, yeah, this is terrible. This is bad for the girls, the girls have this. And so I'm really incredibly proud of that conversation. I'm really excited about where it's going to take us. I think there's so much to do, and it can be a little bit overwhelming at times, but it's also it's just open this amazing panacea of options for women's healthcare that I think is incredibly exciting. And I really am excited about Lady getting a second term, because I think it's going to be great things there.
Thank you. You're allowed to have twos. Jess, we've been talking, and Jess and I sort of co-inspired to put this event together originally. Because as I said in my introduction, it drives me wild when people say, oh, there's no difference in major parties. We'll say, people actually, when you've got to vote for a deal, that's because they've peeled off from the conservative side of politics with their frustration there. But Jess, I know, all of you at the moment are campaigning. We're in an election period. So what are you hearing from women when you're knocking on their doors, when you're talking to them at street stalls, about their understanding of what Labor's achieved for women in this term of government?
A couple of things, Emma. The minister, when she was speaking, she referred to, I think she used the term, the unguided missile of the coalition's work from home abolition agenda, and somewhere in the mix of Jane Hume announcing the end to work from home and Peter Dutton confirming that this was coalition policy. I was on a door off a pretty busy road in a pretty modest block of units, and a man pulled up. I was about to knock on the door, and I talked to him about what he was thinking and how he was going to vote, and he said to me, I've voted Liberal my entire life, but I can't vote for them this time. When I got into that conversation a little bit more, it was because his partner was a public servant, and she did work from home, and that arrangement held together really the entire fabric of their life. And this was an issue that was not just important to women, although, as you can imagine, when you're knocking on lots of doors during the day, the people who are home are usually working from home, so that was quite a hot button issue for us. But not just for women, for men as well. But that's a reaction to a coalition idea and a coalition policy. The conversation that I am most often having on the doors and on the phones at the moment really has been around our historic investments in Medicare. And what I find is that when I'm talking to other women, either on the phone or on the doors, I always start with our historic investments in women's health, and that is the way into the conversation. And while there is so much in the big $750 million package that this amazing woman has led and driven through our government, A couple of the things that really stick with people is the listing of Yaz and Yazan, the two most commonly used contraceptive pills on the PBS, and then cutting the price of PBS medicines if regulated to $25. And then at the other age range, the over 50s in particular, talking about how life-changing it is to put estrogel and prometrium on the PBS. And then drop the price of those medicines. There's always a room where someone puts their hands up and I must say that I have personally had a lot of conversations with women being in that age range of how much cheaper it will be to slather myself in the stuff before I go out on the election campaign, because it is quite shocking, I think, for women who are over 50 to sort of reach that age range and perhaps not be on any medications anytime recently, and then all of a sudden they're paying $60 a month for something that really should just be, healthcare that you shouldn't have to pay extra for just because you're female. So these conversations are a game changer out there for women, and they know it. But it's also, I think, a way into a conversation with people that is very authentic. And we know that something is changing in politics, and that there's a lack of trust in politics. And I think an additional element of the work that Jess done and the way that we're all sharing it and talking about it is it's building a trustful relationship immediately with the person who you're talking to. You're sharing your experience, they're sharing their experience, and then you're on to, how we bring back whole billing, for example. So again, the work that Jen has described has been so grounded in women's experience because of who she is, because of who our majority female government is, connecting in a very authentic way to other women, I think has been ever a game changer for us.
Thank you. While you've got the microphone, I'll ask you the question now. What's the achievement you're most proud of, and how it's related to your work in the Senate?
The achievement that I'm most proud of is our women's economic security agenda, really underpinned by the profound respect that we have shown for feminised industries, in particular for aged care and also for early childhood education. It's really sort of personal for me. Before I had the privilege of representing Victoria up in Canberra in the Senate, I had the privilege of representing some of our lowest paid workers, often women workers, including our early childhood educators. Katy in her speech talked about a sort of a 20-year campaign for women. This grey hair's not for nothing. I feel like I've been there for a lot of that time. I was part of launching the Big Steps in Early Education campaign. I think most of us in the Parliament, when you think about early educators, who we know are mostly women and incredibly undervalued, when you think about them, you think about that blue shirt, the Big Steps campaign shirt. 10 years ago, I think a lot of these women were going to work doing this absolutely essential work, and they were kind of being told, well, don't ask for too much. You kind of do it for the love of it, don't you? Several years ago, I think these women started to say, well, we do love our work. It is really important, but love doesn't pay the rent, and we need to be able to do that. And so these women have found their voice and they've spoken out, but they've needed a government that listened, and that is what we have done. We have seen the value of the work, and then a whole lot of people have very carefully figured out, well, how do we actually get that value into someone's pay packet? We've had to change the laws to do that in multiple ways. We've had to introduce multi-employer bargaining so that educators can come together as a whole sector and lift up their wages. And then just last week, of course, We've had an amazing decision from the Fair Work Commission that early childhood educators deserve a 23% pay rise. And that is because we put gender equity as an object of the Fair Work Act. And the Fair Work Commission then went and said, well, yes, this work is undervalued and a 23% pay rise is needed. So again, I'm super proud of all of our work as one big labour movement on that. Certainly the educators have been speaking up for a long time. What they didn't have was a government who would listen, and we have listened and we have acted, and the consequences of that are profound.
They are, and you should be proud of that work that you've been doing now for a long time, but we're also very grateful to you for your work as a unionist with Big Steps and now seeing this through to implementation. I cried when I saw that Fair Work decision last week. I was an aged care worker in my 20s, and I've relied on the childhood educators, and it's outrageous to me that that work is seen as something you do for love. So congratulations and thank you. We will take some questions from the audience, but I want to, because I'm a policy wonk, ask you all a little bit of a policy process question first, slightly different for each of you. Katy, you and I were advisors in the last Labor government. You've now become an assistant minister yourself, and you've, I think, done that. You worked for one of Labor's best policy brains in Jen Macklin, really leader in the women's field. Tell people here, because there are young people here that want to do this kind of work, what that journey's been like for you, and what's been the most important focus for you in that career, from advising right through to now being a leader in government.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't expecting that question.
No, sorry, these are questions about
No, absolutely. I was just going to gather my thoughts on that. I think, I talked to a lot of school groups as part of my work, and one of the things I always say to them is, do I look like what you think a politician would look like? And even from young kids, the answer is always no. And I think there's a power in that. We talk a lot about how it can be hard for women in politics, and it can be. There's a lot more we still need to do to build on the work, particularly on the Labor side. We'd love to get more people, women into politics. Amazing work by many people over a long time. But there are difficulties being women in politics, but there are also strengths. And I think the strengths are that you get to have different conversations. And Jess talked about that in her work, and Jess has talked about that in her work as well, that the conversations we get to have with community, I think they're very different to the conversations that our male colleagues have. And then the power, I guess, that what you do with that is you get to then take that into a caucus that does listen to women's voices, that is interested in what policies are going to shift the dial. And again, you saw that in Katy's speech, that what she is always thinking about is not what's low hanging fruit here, what's going to actually shift the dial. And you get to see that happen. So for me, again, introducing that bill for Katy into the House to talk about how we are going to do more work to make workplaces more equal. That is really powerful stuff. So I try and lean into as much of that as I can. You're right, I was so fortunate that I got to see Julie Gallagher and Jen Macklin up close and personal doing that, because it's a real piece of, this is what you can get done if you're prepared to do work with colleagues in the community and get narrow change.
Great answer for an unexpected question. Thank you. Jenny's got a great book out at the moment too, and I'll recommend to all of you on how the progress is made. Jen, you've had such a remarkable career from being a nurse to a trade union as president of the ACTU, and now such a transformational assistant minister for health and aged care. What advice do you have for young women in particular who want to see policy change, who want to contribute to policy change based on your experience in those fields?
Well, I'm channeling my I have 5 sisters, so 6 girls in the family. And I'll tell a very quick funny story. Is I remember when I was a very little girl, I was sick at home. I was sick, and Mum got a phone call from the school. She did an after school, one of the babies, young ones in the hierarchy. And my sister was in trouble, my sister Mag, and I got dragged along to this parent-teacher meetings. I must have been 5 or 6, and the teacher was saying to my mum, I remember it clearly about my sister, Mrs. Kearney, your daughter is precocious, she's argumentative, and quite frankly, she's a disruption in my classroom. And my mother said, sir, I have 6 daughters and I raised them all to be just like that. And I've never forgotten that. And we walked out and my sister Mag's like, yes, go Mum. And she's like, Mag, give poor man a break. It's clearly not coping. And so all my life, my mother has said to us, speak up, child, speak up. You know, from the time I was a tiny little thing. And if there's one thing you do, is don't sit there, because I've done it myself, occasionally sit there and think, oh, what have I got to contribute? What could I possibly do? And I think we can do that a lot. And I just hear my mum's voice speak up. So what you've got to say is important, and you know, it can be incredibly powerful. Sometimes it's got me into a lot of trouble. But you know, what do they say about women who don't make history? What's that saying? Well, behaved women never make history. And you can do it in a polite way. I mean, I've always really got into a lot of trouble, but you know, believe that what you've got to say is important, and just stand up and say it. You know? That other great story you might have heard me say is from Penny Wong, my first time in caucus. Have you heard that? Tell you that story in Penny Wong. I was sitting in a room in caucus, a bit nervous, third head out line. There's a big debate on something that I really need to step up and think, oh my God, I can't say this. Katy, there it is. You know, and the Albanese Government, and Penny Wong, there's 10 that said. And Penny Wong texted me from across the room and she said, Jen, this is important to you. Speak up. And I looked at my text message and oh my God. And I texted her back and I said, oh, but Penny, I'm going to argue against you. Because I don't agree with your position on it. She texted back, I know, stand up. And I flew out of my seat. And Jenny McAllister was chairing the meeting. She's like, yes, Jess, I want to talk. She's like, okay, I'll put you on this. And so I guess the message from that is when you have other women in caucus, there's not many men, let's face it, who would encourage you to stand up and speak up. When you women aren't good against them. I mean, it's Hope's case, Penny's one, hands down, of course. But I was so proud of myself that it was important to me that I spoke up. So that's the one thing I would say is speak up. Yeah.
Excellent advice. Have the confidence of meeting your white man ladies. Jess, I was, of course, speaking this afternoon with Sarah Witty here, who's studying in Melbourne. The Labour Party resolution was sent to you after the afternoon tea break. So thank you for being here. Jess, particularly around policy making, in your role as chair of the Economics Committee, which is perhaps something a little bit less visible to those of us. You know, one of those, I think, committees are fabulous. And the thing I'm probably going to miss most about leading Per Capita is turning up and giving evidence of those committees. Yeah. When it came to the changes, particularly the changes around women's economic security, having been part of those hearings, the questions that I would get on, well, isn't this just recurrent spending? Isn't this just, why should we, is this going to be inflationary? Is it problematic to give these people a living wage? How important is that work, is that committee work and that interrogation piece to making the case for change and then seeing change go through the Parliament? Tell people how committees work, what that's about.
Well, I think going back to the example of the care economy, the early childhood educators, the aged care workers, it has been really important to, I guess, articulate all of the reasons why this is really important work. It is billions of dollars from the federal budget to support the wages of early educators. It's billions of dollars to support the wages of aged care workers. And I think the argument about that we're most familiar with is this is really important for valuing the work. It's really important for women's economic security. But at the same time, it is incredibly important to be able to put those kinds of investments in a larger economic frame. And again, if you take early childhood education, it's pretty clear, and the Treasurer, as you said, Emma, has been very strong on this, that those early years are absolutely critical. If we have a qualified, dedicated workforce who we can retain by paying them properly, then we're able to do a better job of investing in young people who will be school ready, who will be ready for higher education, and who will be able to make a strong contribution to the economy. And of course, universal early education requires a strong workforce, and universal early childhood education is absolutely critical to women's workforce participation. So being able to put the arguments that we have as feminists in an economic frame is hugely beneficial to being able to get things through decision-making processes and get them through the Parliament. And again, I think that the Prime Minister early on made it very clear that when he was appointing Katy Gallagher to be the Minister for Women, he also wanted her to be the Minister for Finance, because he wanted to actually put the dollars behind that. But I think everything that Katy has done, she's been able to articulate the benefit not just for women and families and communities, but for the economy as a whole as well.
Because it's not recurrent spending, it's investment.
Yes, right, that's right.
Do you want to reflect
No,
on that?
no, I agree.
We've got a few minutes for questions from the floor. So Sarah, my colleague, has got the microphone. Please introduce yourself and go ahead.
My name is also Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time to share insights, and should we be fortunate enough to have a Labor government again, some of the things that were mentioned earlier today are exciting. I do feel it would be remiss of me not to ask about the devastating deaths that we have had in the last week. I believe we're up to 7 women, 3 of which were within 24 hours. I'm an older millennial, and I remember watching King's Cross come to a grinding halt after the heart-wrenching deaths of 2 young men. And that changed society. We saw celebrities, politicians, and the common person completely change their dialogue to a coward's punch. It felt like it happened overnight. It has already been mentioned in this room that domestic violence against women and families is on the rise. So my question is, how come this hasn't been in the rhetoric for anything for this campaign as we lead to the election on the 3rd of May? And how can we make noise, because I'm fed up?
Thank you. Well, Harvey, that's excellent. Harvey was reminding me today, and I think that would happen.
Yeah, thank you. Look, you're not the only one who's fed up, right? That women across Australia and men across Australia are fed up about this. And I think I said before that if there was one button we could push, or there was one lever we could pull, that's what we've been doing, because it is unacceptable. And we've had vigils in the Parliament, and we've marched, and women have marched for decades, and we're tired, and we just want it done. It is not done. I wish it was. I can't answer for why it is not front page of the, why it's not a question that every journalist doesn't ask a leader every day, but I think that goes to part of the work that we still need to do. And so this is why we really are trying to tackle this on so many fronts. I do think the 2 national cabinets that have been held to specifically deal with family and domestic violence, I know this sounds a bit boring and governmenty, but we were just talking about how important policy is and how it shifted up. I think it is really important that we had the PM and all the premiers in the room together discussing just this issue, and all collectively signing up to more work to be done. That doesn't actually happen on most issues that the country is facing. So that was all our leaders saying, yeah, more to be done, here's how we're taking it forward, and that work is being taken forward. I sit on one of the ministerial councils that together with stakeholders is taking that work forward, and that goes to some of those things Katy was talking about, particularly around perpetrators as well. I do think that, for a long time we have done, or we have been trying to do the work on the national conversation, and we have wonderful organisations who are trying to do the work around respect. Here in Victoria, our state government has led a lot of this work that now we are picking up on nationally. I don't think, to some degree, the body of evidence around perpetrators has been as strong as it should be. And that is something that I think now there is a much stronger focus on both building that evidence, but also trying to invest in the programs that drive change there. And some of that is law and order responses, and that is work being driven by the states with us supporting them. Some of it is men's behaviour change programs, and some of those need to be specific to the communities they're working in. I talked before about First Nations communities. I was in Dubbo recently announcing some significant family violence funding there that was going out through First Nations organisations. And that, in fact, part of it had been awarded as a process led by First Nations organisations. So local orgs that come together with local elders making some decisions around where the focus should be and how money should be allocated. So I know that is a longer answer than you want. I get it. I really do. We all at this stage get it. It does need to change. It will take focus from us, and it will take, I know this can sound like a cop-out, but it will take people out there doing the work as well. It will take men in our communities, in our sporting clubs, continuing to have those conversations, fathers having those conversations with their sons, because we do have to shift the dial, and we do want it to happen a lot faster than it currently is.
Thanks, Kate.
Who would like to ask the next question? Amy?
Thank you, Mrs. My question is, how is the Labour government engaging with African Australian communities to rebuild trust in the justice system and addressing systematic discrimination that continues to result in unfair and sometimes tragic outcomes for youth? For example, there was a recent case involving a young African Australian man experiencing mental health issues who was shot and killed by Victorian police. Community members believe the situation could have been de-escalated with a more cultural, responsive and trauma-informed approach. Instead, it escalated into a vital violence, raising concerns about racial profiling, use of force, and lack of mental health intervention strategy. How will Labour work with our communities to represent such incidents, building cultural safe system and ensure accountable within law enforcement? Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. I might ask you to address that, particularly the mental health areas.
Thanks very much. Well, I think I'll just start by saying one thing we're not going to do, and that is what Peter Dunn does, is drive absolute division and uses that awful card all the time in every election that is resorted to again now. Like today he said Victorians are too scared to go to the shops. And anyway, it's something that we won't do, and it's something that the Labor government is absolutely committed to, is multiculturalism, and the Prime Minister has said that over and over again, and investing in what is a massive strength for this country, which is our diversity and our multicultural communities. I think that from my perspective in the health portfolio, and I think that we could say that there is quite a right across the board, and even in the answer, to Kate's last question, to the last question to Kate, as a government, we've taken all of government approach to these things, and we look at them from the lens of education, of health, of workplace relations, right across the whole board, and how we can incorporate really encompass our diversity right across, and how we can build on these issues. From a health portfolio, we do understand that mental health is a real issue, and the best way that we can deal with those is to work with the themselves, right from very grassroots, and Minister Gallagher pointed out to this. On my Women's Health Advisory Council, we have fabulous representatives from right across all our multicultural communities. And it is really, when I talk about, medical misogyny, if you add on top of that the intersectionality of, all our migrant communities, if you are a Black woman or you're a person whose English is a second language or even a First Nations woman in this country, the intersectionality issues are enormous. And the best way we can tackle those is to invest in our grassroots organisations. We have a wonderful program running at the moment that I announced a few weeks ago, a massive investment in a program called Health in My Language, which is a wonderful program. And we actually fund really grassroots organisations to build up the skills of peer workers in the communities to work in language. Now, this grew out of COVID when there was a lot of misinformation around vaccinations, as we might all remember. That time seems so long ago now, doesn't it? We knew that particularly in migrant communities there were a lot of misinformation that it would render you sterile, that there were all sorts of awful things that would happen if you had the vaccines. And so we educated people to speak about COVID vaccines in language. Most of them were women. And can you imagine what happened? The minute they go into a group of their own community, they start talking in language about COVID and about vaccines. Someone says, here is a trusted person from my community speaking to me in my language. And of course, the conversation veers wide away from vaccines. It goes to domestic violence. It goes to sexual and reproductive health care. It goes to sexual violence. And so the peer workers were being confronted with all of these problems, including mental health issues, particularly the young men. And so we realised the value of this. And so we are reinvesting in that right now so that peer support workers, they're not health professionals, they are community leaders and well-respected people in community who we skill up to have these conversations in language, in community at the most grassroots of levels. And it is, I've gone and sat in on some of these sessions, these programs here in Melbourne actually and down in Tasmania. I've been lucky enough and it is incredibly powerful. And so I think that is where really the investment is to lie. On justice reinvestment, I know that we've been working very closely with the attorneys general around the country. That's the plural, isn't it?
That's right.
The attorneys general and Mark Drake has been working very closely with them around these issues. I can't think of any specific justice reinvestment policies at a federal level, but I'm sure we have them. The community legal centres, exactly. Yes, funding them has been incredibly important. And funding, Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service or the National Aboriginal Legal Services and those grassroots organisations that really do provide important care to communities. But justice reinvestment is very much, and I'm not passing the buck, but it is a state issue, but it is a national problem that we really need to work together on. So thank you for raising it. I hope that answers the questions a bit.
Lastly, Yvonne.
I can sit down, I suppose I don't have to stand up. It's good to stand up at my age. I wonder what happens in our universities when doctors and some nurses are not even taught medical interventions which can help. Like, has anyone heard the word ablation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay. How many of you have heard the word ablation? Not many. 2, 3, maybe. Then for women with long suffering, endometriosis, which can start in the teens, as it did with me. And I was 44 when I finally got a medical intervention. And it was heavenly. Absolutely. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it further. That's one thing. The other is, why is it that the women always have to leave in domestic violence? Why can't we write the last of them? For Christmas, all I want for Christmas is a row of stocks at Federation Square. You know what stocks are? You know what I mean? You've got your head. Okay, stop. I want to give you a couple of those examples might change, the atmosphere and the climate. And when it comes to my work, we're not all ignorant. I still have people that talk to me in a changing their voice or their speech because I'm a migrant woman.
They shout at you.
Yes, absolutely. So I answer them in 4 languages and they go, oh. So there are some things that we need to try. The other thing is housing for older women. There are some projects, 1 or 2. I would like to see more of them, where we can live, 3 or 4 of us together rather than like me in my apartment locked away. There are some things we can do, and I think we need to explore. Much of our system in Australia is about shutting us up. And the subject, or assuming that we can't understand or devise, we don't have that kind of genius. Well, we have it. We can even more. Some of the best examples of what to do in the areas that we discussed today come from countries that are already practicing them. And I don't want to talk too much. I talk too much anyway. Don't I, Jen?
Thanks, Ivana. Thank you.
We'll take that as a statement.
And we have the means.
Yes.
We have the means. We have ethnic radio, etc., etc. Can we try it?
Absolutely.
We will take that as a statement from Ivana, and thank you. And I don't think we're going to come up with a policy to put many stocks in. I think that might be a bit too much. Well, it's amusing, but it's not going to be a government policy anytime soon. You're against all forms of violence. Look, that is all we have time for this terrific panel. Please join me in thanking Kate Thwaites.
Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. It has been a really exciting and wonderful day so far. My name is Sarah McKenzie. I'm the Director of Policy Research at Per Capita. And as we heard this morning, our wonderful leader, Dawson, will be moving on to the Chifley Research Centre. I will be acting in her role, but I thought I'd take this opportunity just to thank you, Emma, for everything you do for policy in Australia and for women who want to be involved in policy. I am also a policy wonk like Dawson, and I probably wouldn't be sitting here today if I hadn't been mentored by her, so thank you very much. We are joined for our final panel by a wonderful group of women, Sarah Witty, Briskey, and Albanese Government. Please make them welcome. Thank you. I won't do long introductions to you because my first question, I wanted to ask you to tell us a bit about your background and how your work has touched over with gender equality in Australia. So, Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Am I hang on? No. Do you want me to just talk like this?
No. Yeah. Oh, we'll need it for the video, so it should be. Is that not?
No, I tried to do it on. It didn't work before.
Oh, well, there you go. We'll just use one.
Am I on now?
Yes.
Hello. So just talking a little bit, introducing myself was the question.
Yes, and a bit about your work and how it's crossed over with gender equality in Australia.
Right. So I'm Sarah Witty. I'm a candidate for Melbourne. I have a very diverse background, I guess. I started my career unskilled and whatnot. I won't go that far back, but I worked in banking insurance, but at the moment I'm the CEO of the Nappy Collective. So we give free nappies to families in crisis, and we do that by families donating their leftover nappies and we pass them on. I've also raised money for social and affordable housing. In the previous role, I raised a pipeline of $110 million for social and affordable housing, something I'm very proud of, and is continuing to put people in houses. Thank you. And in terms of the work I've done for women, I mean, I almost think that at the Nappy Collective, what I'm doing for women is reminding the women that need to change nappies too, and getting them out and about and looking after the children as well as. So I have a mindset that if we give men the power to be at home and do the work at home, then we can give women the power to be at work and do the work in paid work. I think that's me. So thank you.
Thanks very much. My name's Jo Briskey and I'm the Labor candidate from Maribyrnong. My background, I'm a psychologist by training, qualified in child and youth education and developmental psychology, I should say. But I have spent the last 20 years in community advocacy. 6 years as the CEO of the Parenthood, which is Australia's largest campaigning and advocacy organisation for parents and carers, and working with that, having that Australia the best place in the world to be a parent. And my current role is at United Workers Union. We are a large national union that covers about 45 different industries, workers that touch every aspect of the economy, but we are also the national union for early childhood educators and aged care workers. So there's a couple of points there, I think, in terms of touch points with gender equality, in particular, empowering women. A lot of the work that I did at the Parenthood centred around affordability and accessibility of early education and care, access to paid parental leave. There was a time when I was a CEO where we had a previous Australian Treasurer, Joe Hockey, who decided on Mother's Day to announce that he was going to cut paid parental leave access, government paid parental leave access to women who had already received in the workplace. Not to the old double dipper, not to discount the fact that the whole point around government paid parental leave was to actually encourage more businesses to themselves take it up, and that was the point of it. But also, the work that I did at the Parenthood also centred around single parents, majority of whom were single mothers. So we did a lot of work when we were campaigning to increase access to single parent payments. And then at my work at the United Workers Union, both a crossover from the work that I was doing at the Parenthood around campaigning for more affordable early learning, but good quality early learning, which relied on educators and their recognising that they are professionals who deserve to be properly paid for the work that they did. A sector that is predominantly a feminised sector, and I've been very grateful and have had the privilege to work with early childhood educators across the country in their campaign to be properly recognised and valued, and to be able to stand to the side of there when the Prime Minister announced that a Labor government was going to fund a 15% wage increase for early childhood educators was a moment in my career history that I'm particularly proud of. And also the work that we did with the government on aged care as well, the wage increases for aged care workers, again, a female-dominated sector, long overlooked, overpaid, largely caring roles, early education and aged care, and to see a government properly value aged care workers and the reforms that they have been delivering over the course of the last 3 years. There's still more work to do. So it is now a great excitement and privilege and responsibility I now take on the opportunity to hopefully be the new Labor member for Maribyrnong and work with both Lisa as well and Lisa continuing the work of this good Labor government and what it is delivering for women across our country.
Anyone?
Yes, we're on. Hi everyone, so I'm Lisa Darmanin, and I guess I started working in the community sector, and I worked in the areas of family violence and foster care as a community development worker, and that kind of introduced me to union activism really, and that's how I really began my involvement as what I would call a change maker, as a union member, delegate and activist in the workplace, working particularly in community services where I saw the gender pay gap of the work that we did in that sector and how we got paid for the work that we did, particularly around the responsibilities that we would hold, particularly in the area of domestic violence outreach, where you would be working with women whose lives are literally at risk and getting paid like $20, $21 an hour, and the decisions that you make can be the difference between whether children and their mothers escape a violent situation or have a pathway to something that is more safe than what they are currently experiencing. So that took me to the Australian Services Union, where I organised for a number of years and became the secretary of that union, and then did a lot of work around women's work. Probably the two highlights of my work in advocating at the Australian Services Union were the
social and community services equal pay case that the union ran nationally, where we got an outcome under the previous laws that were very difficult to run equal pay cases, but we saw between 19 and 45% pay rises awarded to workers in the social and community services sector. And whilst that is amazing, what that also shows is that's how much those women have been underpaid over a long, long period of time, up to 45% underpayment for work that they do. So that was a real privilege to be able to do that work, and also to achieve quarter long service leave for women in that sector, because that's one that we often don't talk about. But in the community sector, people move from job to job because it's very stressful work. People often want another move on, but they will stay within the sector, but never work long enough with one employer to get long service leave. So in Victoria, we have a quarter long service leave scheme, and I think next year is the first year that people will start to pay attention to that. So that'll be fantastic. I also did a little bit of work at the Department of Premier and Cabinet when Fiona Richardson was the Minister for Women here in Victoria, around the Family Violence after the Family Violence Royal Commission, and worked on implementing a number of the recommendations around that. And I guess what I learned from that is how important it is for activist organisations like unions and other aligned community organisations to influence and change policy through government. Because what I saw working in Department of Premier and Cabinet is the implementation of policy, much of which is the result of the advocacy and campaigning of organisations in the community to make that change. And without those organisations, government often can't or won't implement policy to make change. So I worked on the development of the first gender equality strategy for Victoria, which was really the forerunner to our national strategy now. Victoria is well ahead when it comes to investment and action on closing the gender pay situation, not just gender pay, but gender equality in Victoria. And I also did quite a bit of work on implementing the Victorian government commitment around women on boards and getting 50-50 women on boards, and developing a policy proposal around extending that to chairs, not just members of boards, but also chairs of boards on Victorian government. So yeah, most of my work has been around gender equality, as it turns out.
Thank you. I want to ask a bit more about some of our work. So this morning we heard, earlier this afternoon, one of the things that this Kearney said was how she felt when the Family and Domestic Violence Leave Amendment was introduced in Parliament. Well before Per Capita, when I left working backstage and started working with the Actors Union, one of my first conferences was the Geelong Women's Conference, and I heard you, Lisa, speaking about, and the We Won't Wait campaign was in full swing then, speaking about 2008 and getting paid family and domestic violence leave into Surf Coast EA. I wanted to ask a bit about what it takes to get something that from one workplace to a campaign, to a national campaign, and then eventually into Parliament. And then I also think, Joe, as well, we were seeing that with Big Steps and with the ECEC reform. So in these industries that you were both working in unions in and working in, where it is highly feminized, insecure work, how do you keep that momentum going?
I knew you were going to ask about that, so I didn't talk about that
thank
in my intro. But yeah, one of the things that was a real privilege to work on at the Australian Services Union was achieving the first entitlement for workers to access paid family violence leave as an enforceable entitlement in an enterprise agreement. So what we got was 20 days paid leave for people who were experiencing family violence, but not just the paid leave, also other workplace supports like adjustments to the workplace, such as changing phone numbers, limiting access to perpetrators to the workplace, and other support for victim survivors to be able to navigate their life whilst dealing with that situation. And I think, what it took, with campaigns, there's strategy and then there's luck, and then there's often the intersection between both. And I think what we had been approached, so the union movement in general had been approached by some fabulous women from University of New South Wales who had this idea around paid family violence leave for a number of years, and had been trying to get employers interested in the idea and introducing it into their workplaces. And it wouldn't shock any of you all to know that that didn't get very far. They were not really interested. So then they started talking to the union movement, and so they talked to the Victorian Trades Hall Women's Committee, full of activists, and then the Geelong, the Victorian Trades Hall Women's Committee took it to the Geelong Women's Committee. We had a workplace delegate who was experiencing family violence at the time, was also involved in the negotiations at her workplace, Surf Coast Shire Council, and said, well, this idea is really relevant to me right now. We should try and get this in my workplace. So that's kind of how, people have to hook into the issues. You can't just pluck an idea out of the air if it doesn't sort of resonate with anyone to then galvanise activity around it. So this delegate was keen. We worked with her, and I think it was also a very very useful that our union represents workers in local government, so that's the Surf Coast Shire Council, but also community services where I came from. And one of our lead organisers who worked with us on developing the idea about how you would actually implement it in a workplace was actually, the first one, a lot of resistance. The employers were like, oh, there's health and safety issues, there's, we don't want to get involved in someone's private life, all kinds of objections. But we had someone, I don't know if anyone here knows, Julie Kuhn, who will be known to some in the community sector, was an organiser at the union at the time and has a social work background, and was able to put together, make the links between the industrial issues and the social issues, and why the workplace was quite a good setting to develop the policy around this. So that was very useful and somewhat lucky that it was we were able to put all that work together. And then the other thing that was really lucky, I'll tell you this little story. Does anyone remember at around that time there was a workplace delegate who got sacked from their workplace, Geelong Council, for taking a free steak sandwich, and it was on the front. It was on the Sunrise show, and there was a big hoo-ha about it. No, Emma's nodding her head. Others don't remember. Anyway, it went national. It was called Steakgate. Geelong City Council is right next door to Surf Coast Shire Council. You ask, well, how are these two things related? Well, they were happening at the same time. Negotiations at Surf Coast were happening at the same time as this delegate at Geelong got sacked for taking a free steak sandwich. And the national media was on speed dial with this particular organiser who was negotiating both agreements, both in both workplaces. And we got to a point at Surf Coast where they were like, oh, we're not sure we want to agree to this family and domestic violence clause. It's new, we don't want to be the first. And he's like, well, you know what, I've got Carl Stefanovic on speed dial here. Do you want to be the one that says no to these, family violence survivors, that you can't give them some paid leave because of the situation they're dealing with? And so, that is minimising it a little bit because there was a lot of work that went into it, but there is also luck, and you have to take your opportunities as they come. And that last little push got them over the line. And so once you get the first one, it's not easy, but then it becomes a bit of a domino effect. So then you move to the next workplace and the next workplace, and then, so our aim was to, you get the first one and you provide some hope, and you talk to other workplaces about it, and you can negotiate it at a few other councils, then it becomes a bit of a standard in that industry. And then, we have the alignment with the Victorian Royal Commission into Family Violence. One of the recommendations of that was to provide paid leave in workplaces, which was very helpful. We engaged, put in submissions. So it's about looking at the opportunities that are in front of you about how you can keep pushing your cause. So then that became a state government policy for all state government workplaces. And, you know, it just kind of rolls on, and then, you know, you take it to the ACTU and you say, well, it should be a national policy, and then, you know, we move it into, well, it should be part of the NES. And so
What year was it?
well, the agreement at Surf Coast Shire was, I think it was 2010 we actually got it. And so 14 years later is really not that long in the grand scheme of things, from one workplace in, you know, regional Victoria to the entire country. Yeah, but it, you know, there's a lot of, it's the activism that kind of makes it all happen, I think.
Thank you. And a similar question for you, Joe, reflecting on, you know, how there have been changes in New Zealand have been said to come into our lives, but I know that there has been quite a decade of work behind that. So if you could tell us more about that.
Probably almost 2 decades, I would suspect. In terms of our campaign for childhood educators, definitely, I started with the union in 2013, and my job at the union was organising in the early childhood space, and we, back then, I made some big steps. We had the black t-shirts with the pink balloon, and that, in terms of a workforce to organise, it's very difficult because a lot of centres, this is why it was important to have lots of people like that, but a lot of centres, there's lots of little tiny ones. We've got some really big providers like Woodstart and some of the large for-profit providers, but the majority of educators work in individual sectors. So you are spending a lot of time in your car driving to different centres, and it would be organised in patches, which were federal electorates, because we recognised the importance of organising politically as much as organising industrially, because we knew that in order to secure a change in the space, it had to come from government. A government that, you know, early childhood education is 80% government subsidised or government funded. So if we were going to achieve it, we knew we needed government investment. But it took a very long time, because part of the challenge we also had to do, and this is part of work I came in to do at Parenthood, was organise not just within the workplace, but within the community as well, and making the connection between the importance of early education, not just for, and the importance of educating people properly, not just important to those educators and their livelihoods, but also the difference it makes for the quality of early learning that's accessible to families. Because at the time, and it's got significantly worse up until just recently when we had the wage increase, early educators could not afford to stay and work because you were getting paid the minimum wage of about $20, $21 back when I first started organising, and you just can't afford to live on that wage. And so what parents were seeing was a continuing new educators coming through and working with their kids every couple of months, and that, you know, it's not great for children, and parents were recognising that. So part of the work we did was looking at how can we organise the community to be on our side, to also lobby government, and that is a lot of work we were doing at the Parenthood. So I got to combine my union organising and then going into the organising of parents. But it also took a long time to shift community sentiment around early education. I still remember when I was at Parenthood and I was doing media on looking to see if both affordable for families but also properly recognising educators. You know, the talk about radio was, why should we fund, you know, pay for people to have children, and, you know, why you just pay for, you know, people that are just, you know, wiping bums and you know, what is it? It's not really that important. You're basically babysitting. And so a lot of work has been done in actually shifting community attitude towards the importance of early education, and partnering with research organisations at universities and a range of different people within this civic society coming together on a common goal, because it was, first 1 years of life are the most important. And so this is where we actually, it's not just about how good it is for educators, but actually it is, we are fundamentally shifting and changing the trajectory of someone's life. And, you know, you look at research across the globe, globally, people aren't investing in it, governments are not investing in early education because of the benefit that it has to workforce participation. In fact, they're doing it in terms of the benefit it brings to the education of their communities, of their society. And it was about bringing that to community, and it takes a long time to shift community values and expectations, but it also, you know, to Lisa's point around, you do need to sometimes bring government and force government to the court. So we got there slightly in when Joy Gillard was Prime Minister. She announced a early education fund. It wasn't enough to cover the entire sector, so it was a bit problematic, but at least it was the first time we had set it up and recognised the need for wages to increase. So we got there, but then unfortunately Thwaites won the next election, so he quickly took that fund away. And then so we still had quite a bit of work to do. We had a commitment out of Bill Shorten when he was a Labor leader in 2019, that the Labor government that he led would fund, not too similar to the grant that came in under Gillard, but slightly recognised the need to increase it. And then it took this Labor government under Anthony Albanese as a combination. I think this is where it shifted, just jumping back to the reforms in industrial relations reforms in terms of multi-employer bargaining, to combine both a recognition that government had a role to play in funding wage increases for a government-funded sector like early learning, but also recognising the industrial element of it, the industry that was required to bring multiple employers to the table, and then a part of the government that supported bargaining, and then government at the table as well as the primary funder. I think that has been the key difference in how we've been able to achieve this outcome, and that I see makes it a sustainable and long-term actual reform shift that, unlike what happened in 2013 when ABBA won, can't be taken away. There will be educators who have been campaigning in big steps their entire careers, and many who have been in early education for 20, 30 years. So it's been a big, long journey, and we're still not there yet. I mean, 15% is not quite at par. We had the Fair Work Commission recently announced a gender undervaluation of at least 23% for early childhood educators, which is another big shift. We're keen to see it on par with what aged care workers have received, so it's about 25%. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. But it has been a big, long journey. But it has been about, as I was just touching back, about bringing community with you and bringing all the different parts of the stakeholders, all the people who have a stake in the outcome, together on the common goal that has been the shift in how we're being able to achieve the outcome.
Thank you. So I think the Labour Party has recognised for 30 years how important it is to have women in positions of leadership and representing Australians, around 51% women in Australia, and we now have over 50% women on government boards. Sarah, I was wondering if you could talk a bit about in your employment and your history in work, how things have changed as a female leader in a lot of those spaces over that period.
There's definitely been a shift to, I remember when I was working in banking and I was the first woman in that position in that banking, and that was only a short time ago, by the way. And I came into that role, and the men in the role treated me really well. They were beautiful men. But one of the first comments was, "I thought you would have got this job just because you're a woman." And of course, I said, "Do you think you got this job just because you're a man?" Well, it didn't go down too well. But to think that was sort of only a short time ago, and then the women in that organisation then started saying to me, hey, I never thought that I could do that role, but now I can. So it's that element, that idea of see it and be it. And so the more women that are stepping up into these leadership roles and doing, better than men in most cases, because you always have to be better when you're in a man's world. You have to do everything as well as be better. So it's allowing the next generation to come through and see it and be it. And that's absolutely something that I've seen happen in my small world. I'm a big advocate for employing women, and I don't mean employing women in the workforce. I mean, if I need my walls painted, I employ a woman. If I'm going to the doctor, I employ a woman. If I'm selling my house, I employ a woman. And I think that's the best way we can all sort of support each other, because, by the way, men have been doing it for years. And it's nothing different about it. It's just making sure that you've got two people that are equal. And to do those jobs that you would normally just automatically get a guy in to do it, well, get a woman in to do it, and it's harder to find them and whatnot. So I've gone on a bit of a tangent, which wasn't really what was asked, but there's definitely been a shift. I think it's in different industries, the shift is greater than in others. There's still male-dominated. We expect a man in research and banking to be the right person, but there has been a shift in there. And now, sort of more recently, I'm working in the not-for-profit sector, and that's predominantly women-led, but we still see a team of women and a man as the leader, which is always upsetting for me. Why are we doing that? And it's just this unconscious bias. And that the first time I heard those two words, I was in this male-dominated industry, and it opened up a whole new, wow, this is what's been happening to me sort of attitude. But I think it's definitely, there is a shift. I think that attitude of I thought you got it just because you're a woman is changing, particularly when we put it back to them and say, let them know that they absolutely got it most likely because they're a man. So, yeah.
That's so true. Thank you. So I feel like we are, or we have been, kind of a real turning point in work, how work is structured, so the rise of AI, we now have remote work, working from home is quite normal, so much so that when the opposition leader tried to take it away, I felt like Australia was about to light on fire. But how are women shaping that future, and how are the policy and advocacy efforts, making sure that women are not left behind as they have been in previous policy for how we shape our future of work?
Okay. I think, in some ways, I think there's not a lot that's different, apart from, I think, there are more women in power to make change. But in terms of the women raising their voices, I guess it's about, if I think about, so AI and work, for example, there are plenty of unions doing lots of really good and important work. And in the past, they have been doing good and important work on other things that are relevant to women's work. So my union, the ASU, family violence leave, equal pay in the community sector, paid parental leave before that. Like, unions are always doing work for their members. So I think that isn't new. What women are facing in the workplace is new, but you have women who are organised in workplaces raising the concerns and then having forums to address them. I think what's different is that, in governments and in policy making, we have more women in positions of power to be able to do something about it and perhaps hear those voices a bit more clearly. So Lisa Chesters is chairing an inquiry into AI and the workplace. Labor member for Bendigo, I think she might have got a mention this morning by Katy in her speech. So, she's chairing a really important committee around AI and its impact on work. And the finance sector union are doing really important work on the impacts of AI in the finance sector and mostly women workers.
So I think, it's about people who have their hands on the levers of change to be able to work with the activist organisations to be able to deliver those things.
I would see in terms of not necessarily AI piece of literal change in work, but also the shift in how we work, and then talking about working from home and flexible work. That has shifted, I think, a sense not just for women and how they work, but also for men as well. So what we're seeing now, I think, more so, even I'm thinking about my own circumstances with my husband, when he took leave for us, it was my second child, because he had the ability to. In previous works, he'd never been able to take paid parental leave, but in this particular rock job, he was able to, and he took it up. And he was experiencing, at that time, this is only, our daughter is now 8, so this is about 7 years ago. He was getting people like, oh, aren't you so brave, taking all this time off work? And he was actually being asked to do seminars for work to encourage more men to take up leave, and he was like, aren't you worried you're going to get moved over for, more work and more opportunities? And he's like, oh, I really am. Like, Ravi, women have been experiencing that time and eternity. But even in that short period of time now, it's an expectation that men have. It is, I see more men at the school drop-off than I've seen when I first, when our eldest daughter, who's now in grade 6, when she first started school. There has been a shift in particular when people begin parenthood and managing parental responsibilities and caring responsibilities with paid work, that we're now seeing a slight shift in how the two genders respond to it. I mean, there is still a reality that for the majority of women do physically have to take more time, do take time out of work, and that still is having an impact on their career progression. I mean, the fact that we finally got super paid on paid parental leave is a massive achievement, because that is continuing the super pay gap that exists. So we're seeing these shifts, but what it is, both in terms of not just the actual functionality of it or the policy objective of it, it's shifting the attitudes and it's shifting the cultural norms that exist. And I have absolutely seen that just in the time of when I first, became a mum about, it'll be 12 years at the end of this year, to now. There, I think, has been a pretty significant shift. And I hope we continue to see that. But I think we will. I think the generations that are coming up through work now are far more demanding of the ability to better manage work and family life, whether it's parenthood or whether it's looking after elderly parents, where previously that would absolutely fell on the woman to do, but we still do find it now, but it is increasingly becoming, I think, more of a shared objective. And as often is the case, once men get involved, there seems to be a bit more of an impetus, but I think that's been something I've absolutely noticed just in the last 8 to 10 years.
So two things I want to talk about is, the first one is AI, and I know this might be controversial, but as a leader of a not-for-profit, overworked, underpaid is basically what I've accepted by accepting this role. I've gone backwards in my pay as my title went up, which is madness, but women's work. But what I wanted to say about AI is, if you're in a not-for-profit and you don't use AI, you're crazy, because it's absolutely changed my world in my ability to get work done. Yeah. I know it might be wrong in saying that, but the amount of work that you're expected to do to prove your worth, I am worth this, and by the way, you need to pay me what I'm worth. I need to fill out all these forms and ask for all this money. And by using AI to do that, it's just reduced my workload down dramatically, so that I can actually do the work rather than justifying the fact that I have to be paid. So it's made a real difference to mine and my colleagues' work-life balance. Just being able to get out of work on time. And then the other is the idea of working from home. So the organisation that I run, we are 100% work from home. There is women that would not be able to work if it wasn't for the flexibility of being able to work from home. And it's really, it blew my mind just recently. I was lucky enough, thank God, we finally got in a position with our organisation to be employing somebody new. And I knew I have a responsibility as a leader of the organisation to pay the women that we're employing appropriately. They're usually going to be women. That always plays on my mind, how to do that. But so I advertised a part-time or a fully remote role at what I consider to be a relatively low wage. And not only the amount of applications I received, but the calibre of the women that applied for this role blows my mind. And I'm almost ashamed that I have to pay so little to the person that I'm giving this job to. And the reason why she is very happy to be working with us, she starts on Monday, can't wait, is because of the flexibility of working from home. That's what every single candidate that I interviewed just said. It's about this, flexible working from home. I can fit it around my life. If COVID did anything good for us, it was giving us the flexibility. It was making men realise, hey, you're missing out on stuff at home, so let me go and pick up the kids from school. If anything that government should do in terms of the remote working from home situation is, first of all, if they want to stop it, they should get out of the way and not make policies, as we've noticed to absolutely happen. But we should also even go a step further and put policies in place to make sure that we can continue to work from home. And it's not just, it's for women, obviously, is the main beneficiary of that. It's for the children that are in their lives, but it's also for the men as well, because they're missing out on this great home life that, now they can have. Yeah, that's right.
I remember when I first started in the movement, and I went to Victorian State Law Council's Women's North Conference, and they were talking about taking an old women's stroke. And I remember going to see the two colleagues who were seeing, also first time I'd seen people sharing jobs at a high level of that. And I was really frustrated. I was like, why didn't we finish that conference with a decision? We're going to do it next week. And Jodie and Peter at the time sat me down and they said, look, Sarah, when we talk about gender equality, we are not talking about replacing the patriarchy with another version of the patriarchy. We're talking about lifting everybody up to real gender equality. And we don't want to repeat mistakes or choices, and say it's not a nice way to say it, but the choices of the past that have excluded groups from our movement and from having a good and prosperous life. We know that all women have the same experiences at work or in life. So how can policy, but also your advocacy efforts, make sure that they include women of colour, women with disabilities, and any other workers and female workers who have been kept out of those sort of leader positions in the past?
Yeah, go for it. I think it's a really good point of experience that I've had. We do this in terms of intersectionality, that we need to be constantly making sure that we're mindful of and knowing what the own impact of knowing what we don't know, and always consciously looking at how do we do that. And you do that by listening, by engaging, by making sure we're thinking outside the square. We're getting feedback from places, of experience that we don't have. And I think it's a really important point to try as best we can to be consciously focused on that, and always look which element have we missed, because ultimately we do. We're all biased to our own experiences. We're all we all have an unconscious level of bias, but it's when we choose to step out of that and look at what are the different intersectionalities that exist and how can we best get the experience in the room that can help shape a far more diverse and inclusive response. And it's something we're just going to always have to be consciously engaged in. And I think this is coming from a union that has a very diverse membership and a very, largely female dominated, but workers, we also have male dominated industries, but we always focus on, listening to and being aware of all of the differences that exist in that space. And we've got, it is a union that is exposed to that in its, in who we are and who, the workplaces or the sectors that we represent. But always, I just think the point I want to leave, this room with is just being conscious of it as much as you possibly can and always listen to it.
Can I add, I agree. I think that we can also learn from our successes in setting targets that are measurable and rules and things like that. And, because you set a structure and people have to meet it and they will make the allowances, or not the allowances, they will find, because there are people that can, add value and contribution that is super important that would otherwise be overlooked. So being specific around making space, and that's what we've done with, in the Labor Party with our rules around affirmative action. Like, it wouldn't have happened without them.
No.
Absolutely, men are not getting out of the way. So we shouldn't be surprised that if we don't have targets elsewhere, that things don't move as fast as what we might like. But the other thing is, I think we should be very vigilant that things don't go backwards. Like, we've seen Trump and, this, war on diversity and inclusion in the United States, and we've been doing a lot of campaigning, all three of us, I'm sure. I don't know how many times you've been in kind of the engagement that I've had with people who vote. Some of the issues that they don't like are the woke agenda. Yeah. So I think we have to be absolutely, in this kind of inclusionary approach that we think is important to represent everybody in our community. It's not a view that's held by all of us, sadly. And so I think that we have to defend what we have and also be very vigilant to how we can address the rubbish when people talk to us about, things have gone to work and, the schools are teaching kids the wrong things and, because there are people like that out there, everyday people that will get a vote. And so not only do we need to be thinking about creating space for everybody to raise their voices, but we need to be ready to bash back those who are trying to wind us back in the other direction.
I mean, I obviously agree with everything that you're saying, but I'm just going to share a story about a friend of mine from high school, and she came from apartheid South Africa, as she identifies as mixed white and black heritage. We were friends in high school and lost along the way, and we've reconnected in life now. And she was telling me the other day that she never felt she fitted in Australia. And I was, what do you mean? You and I were the same. We were mates and we hang out together and we were mates and whatnot. And then she explained to me some of the things that she'd experienced, and it absolutely blew my mind, because to me we were kind of the same. So my point in telling you this is to say that I don't know what I don't know, and we need to keep asking the questions. And when we think we've got it right, we need to keep checking in and keep asking the questions and making sure that the people that are affected by the decisions or the attitudes or the outcomes are engaged and a part of the conversation. And that's something that I think is probably the most important thing to do.
And I just have one more question. Thank you so much, all of you. I know we're in the middle of the election campaign, so I really appreciate your time. The last term of this government, there have been some huge gains for women across all different spaces. In fact, we put together a sheet of those gains, a double-sided paper. We couldn't fit them all on and some off. It was wild, which is not a bad problem to have. I want to ask, what are your hopes for the next term? What are you most excited for in policy for women, policy for working women in particular? Do you want to start, Seth?
I'm excited for, I mean, we're all very passionate women up here, and we heard stories of particularly these two amazing women next to me about the 14 years or 20 years of fighting that they did, and the idea that those ideas, the thought that those ideas are still bubbling away in the background and there's still passionate women that are driving them forward, and then they're going to make them be policy and be change, and that's exciting to me.
Thank you. I'm pretty excited, particularly in the early education space, to have a Prime Minister who wants to see universal early education as his legacy, as well as super for Kearney and Medicare for all. I mean, that's pretty significant, and it is an area where it has a massive shift because it has been for a very long time. Their business model has been babysitting, and now we're really starting to see a shift, and that is a shift that has been driven by passionate women and women activists, and that's pretty exciting for me. And I'm hoping and to even potentially have to be a part of that government, a member of that government, and to see that realised is a pretty exciting thing for me.
I think there's always more to do. I think that it is having very recently joined the federal Labor team. What has struck me, and I think I heard someone when I arrived just in the break talk about this in some way. It's not just about the numbers, but it's about the culture, and like there is a real shift. Well, I don't know what it was like before, but it is just fabulous to be in the Senate where Penny Wong and Katy Gallagher are my bosses, and you know, the supportive environment and the way that things are done and the way people support each other is really quite different to anything I've experienced before, even in the union movement. And I think with a team like that continues, the agenda is really, unstoppable. And that's very exciting. A couple of minor, not minor, but in terms of detailed things, I talked about this in my first speech, but I think additional areas we need to look at are closing the gender pay gap in superannuation and what the structure of the retirement system for women looks like, because it still is built around a working career that is modelled on a man. And the other thing is around funding women's work properly, because where women predominate, the issues we face are because it's reliant on public funding that relies on us having to fight all the time about the worth of those jobs, as opposed to how much it costs to build a road, for example. And so I think that, there's a new frontier to be had around some of those things, but with, a changing culture of women running the country as part of the Labor team, then I'm feeling very optimistic about those things.
Excellent. That is wonderful. Thank you all. And please join me in thanking Lisa, Joe, and Sarah for their time today. Thank you very much. Good luck over the next 10 days. Thank you. I'm really excited to see what our next two major looks like, although I imagine it will come a bit of a talk. I'm now going to hand over to Emma to wrap us up, and then we'll be having some drinks. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thanks. Thank you. Thanks, one more.
Well, just a few concluding remarks from me today at this terrific event. Per Capita's been in the business of researching and coming up with policy ideas to promote gender equality now for many years. And as I said earlier, to see so much achieved in one term of government has been remarkable and very gratifying, but no accident, because it does come from a consistent and determined push within the Labor Party to ensure that women are at the centre of its power structures, and that we have a gender equal government and a commitment to ensuring that slightly more than half the population isn't treated as an afterthought or as a minority. It is important that we protect these gains and that we continue to push forward and that we continue to implement policies that will ensure that half our population reaches their full potential, lives lives of safety and security, and is able to contribute in the ways they choose to, and not just the ways that they are left to do. This idea that women make different choices and therefore some sort of gender equality is inevitable ignores, of course, the fact that we don't make choices in a vacuum. We make choices depending on the opportunities afforded to us and the structure of the economy we live in. And so I've been really proud to see this Labor government make such strides forward for women and girls. And we will look forward to what they are able to do in their second term with some of these fantastic women that hopefully will be joining the caucus. I want to say a few words of thanks today, firstly to Meredith Eldridge, who is our Operations Director and who organises all of our events and does all of the hard, boring work of booking venues and making sure we've got food and making sure we've promoted it properly and doesn't get nearly enough credit and recognition. So Meredith, thank you. You're an absolute wonder. And I'm going to miss working with you every day very much. Margaret McKenzie's here, who's our senior economist, chief economist at Per Capita, and also brings years of experience and wisdom to our team, and has always looked at the economy through a gender lens. It's just her natural tendency, and I've learned a lot from you, Marg, over the years. And to Sarah McKenzie, my current 2IC, but will be stepping into my shoes in just over a week when I finish up at Per Capita. Sarah joined us a couple of years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I don't feel like I've known you forever. She, of course, is also the Deputy Mayor of the City of Yarra, sole Labor councillor on that important inner city council, and is really going to, I know, continue the work that we do so incredibly well. Today wouldn't have happened without Sarah. I had let's do this, and then I got off to New York on holiday, and Sarah has put the whole thing together. And as you can see from her masterful management of that last panel, they're not going to miss me at all. She's going to fill those shoes incredibly well, and I know you've got a huge future in either policy or politics or whatever you wish to do. This is my last event as ED of Per Capita. It's been almost 9 years. It's bittersweet for me, but I leave the organisation in such capable hands, mainly female hands. We are the only predominantly female think tank in the country, and for a long time I was the only woman that led a think tank in the country. Danielle Wood, now Arena Sarath Napali at Grattan, and a couple of others, but think tanks, like politics, have not traditionally been female-friendly spaces, and I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that we've had an impact on gender equality policies, but also the fantastic, very capable younger women that are coming up, and older women too, me and Mug, that can make this work and continue this work. I'm not going far. I'm going to the Chifley Research Centre, and we'll be having conversations about gender equality and the Labor agenda in that regard when I'm there as well later this year. But thank you all for coming today. Please stay and have a drink. We've got drinks, and there's not many of us to enjoy them, but you've got time. And please stay in touch with us if you're not already on our mailing list. The team will continue to do this work. We do great work as well in housing affordability, in welfare and social security, in new industries and the future of work. We're a small but mighty organisation. I'm very privileged to have led it for almost 9 years, and I'm very, very happy to be leaving it in such capable hands. Thanks you all for coming, and I will see you at whatever next Per Capita event, but I'll just be sitting at the back of the room next time. Thanks again. Bye-bye.